Good morning, everyone. I'm Bill Treanor. I'm the Dean of Georgetown Law. And on behalf of the law school, it's my privilege to welcome you to the Color of Surveillance, Government Monitoring of American Immigrants, which is our second Color of Surveillance conference in as many years. The Snowden disclosures of 2013 triggered a national debate about government surveillance, and that debate continues today. Yet, across that time and throughout that debate, too little attention has been paid to the fact that government surveillance does not affect everyone equally. There's a disparate impact to surveillance, color of surveillance. And this conference, which is hosted by the Law Center's Center on Privacy and Technology, is about closing that gap. It's about exploring the historical origins of that bias and about laying bare what it means today, when surveillance can be carried out at a previously unimaginable scale and with a previously unimaginable precision. So last year, the conference focused on surveillance of African Americans. This year, we'll focus on the surveillance of American immigrants. As Alvaro Bedoya, our center's executive director, argued in The Atlantic this morning, and if you haven't seen it yet, I urge you to go to the Atlantic and read his article. As he argued, the idea that immigrants are dangerous, that they need to be investigated and watched, that's a very old idea. But taking the modern machinery of surveillance and using it to that end raises novel and profound concerns for privacy, for civil rights, and for civil liberties. And we have a remarkable program today. It's extraordinary to see who our speakers are. And our speakers today, and it's truly an interdisciplinary program. They come from the fields of law and policy and history, sociology, technology, and the arts. They'll delve into all of these subjects. And I'm particularly proud that this conference reflects the law school's bedrock commitment to social justice. So if you go to the library, you see our mottos over the doors of the library: law is but the means, justice is the end. We have a bedrock commitment to social justice. And we're now focusing on applying that commitment to social justice to the field of law and technology and privacy. So in 2017, that intersection between technology and social justice is at the heart of what we do here. So before turning matters over to Alvaro, I want to close by recognizing the center's sponsors: the Ford Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the Media Democracy Fund, and the Open Society Foundation. Without you, this center, this conference would not be possible. And then finally, I just want to thank Alvaro. Alvaro is, as I said, the executive director of our Center on Privacy and Technology. In a very short time here, he's really done two things. One, he's focused on making law students aware of technology and its implications for the law. And so he started new academic courses. We have a terrific program that he's involved in with MIT, where law students and MIT computer science students work together to study privacy and its implications and proposed regulations. So he's focused on making law students aware of technology and what it means for the law. And then he's put together some remarkable conferences that really grapple with the intersection of technology and law and think through what the appropriate limits should be. And I think in important ways, in conferences like this and pieces like his Atlantic article, he's doing so much to advance our national conversation. So without further ado, Alvaro Bedoya.
Thank you for that very generous introduction, Dean Treanor. We could not do what we do without your support, without our faculty directors, and the support of all leadership here at Georgetown Law. Welcome to the Color of Surveillance. In particular, I would like to recognize two distinguished groups of special guests. Our speakers, who you will be hearing from shortly, and our Color of Surveillance delegation, led by the Center for Media Justice. This is a group of grassroots civil liberties, racial justice, civil rights, privacy advocates from around the country. We are honestly lucky to have each and every one of you here. On Monday, December 7th, 2015, then presidential candidate Donald Trump called for a total and complete shutdown on Muslims entering the United States until, quote, our country's representatives can figure out what is going on. His words and actions have opened new wounds. But the fiction at their core, the idea that immigrants as a people are dangerous, that they must be closely watched and investigated, that we have to figure out what's going on, that is very, very old. In one way or another, our nation has been trying to figure out what's going on for more than a century. This conference will trace that history. We'll begin with the Chinese and Indian exclusions of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Our interlocutor will be Center Deputy Director Laura Moy, whose own family was marked by the Chinese exclusion. Professor Mei Nai will explain that this year, 2017, is not the first year that our government banned a people and subjected them to extreme border interrogations. Professor Seema Sohi will explore how the transatlantic surveillance partnership that defines our modern era arguably has roots to the American, Canadian, and British surveillance of Indian immigrants on the Pacific coast of the United States in the early 20th century. Around that same time, the same government agencies spying on Indian immigrants were also spying on a nascent African-American civil rights movement. The movement of W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, Nkechi Taifa will tell us about that surveillance, the persecution, and specifically the persecution and deportation of Marcus Garvey, himself a Jamaican immigrant. Most of you know that during World War II, the U.S. Census Bureau shared Japanese Americans' names and addresses with military authorities that placed them in so-called internment camps. You may not realize it, but you know this because of Professor Margot Anderson and her research partner, Professor William Seltzer, who discovered that sharing. And so today, Margot Anderson, joined by Center Faculty Director Professor Paul Ohm, will tell you about how she discovered the disclosure of Japanese Americans' data, how the Census Bureau initially denied it, in fact, for a long time denied it, and what those disclosures mean for the census, confidentiality, and statistics in government. After World War II, when Japanese Americans left internment camps, who moved in? Professor Ron Mize, will explain how, in many cases, it was Mexican-American guest workers, braceros. The surveillance of immigrants is not new. It is very old. But after 9/11, fueled by the war on terror and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the intensity of that surveillance and the technology used to effectuate it changed dramatically. Then came the candidacy and election of Donald Trump. When Trump calls Mexican Americans drug traffickers and rapists, when he says a judge cannot do his job because of his Mexican heritage, when he implies that Muslim immigrants are party to some vast Islamist conspiracy, we cannot pretend that it does not send a signal to the rank and file of our nation's immigration enforcement officers. George W. Bush and Barack Obama deported millions. Under President Obama, much of the technology of the war on terror began to be used to find undocumented immigrants. We did not get here overnight, but it has been decades since we have seen this marriage of open xenophobia and unchecked surveillance power. And so we will survey the current state of immigrant surveillance in America. We will look at the border. Hassan Shibli will discuss what extreme vetting looks like and how it is coupled with invasive high-tech device searches. Patricia Macias Rojas will explain how border surveillance is no longer just about border crossings. It's about surveilling border communities. And Patrick Eddington will talk about how border surveillance is no longer limited to the border. We will look at technology. At the heart of the technological transformation of immigration enforcement are biometrics, precise, digitized measurements of immigrants' bodies, their faces, their fingers, their DNA. Parmita Shah will discuss how ICE uses mobile fingerprint readers in the field, often without any kind of reasonable suspicion. Nima Singuliani will talk about how immigration authorities are using face recognition technology to search state driver's license photos for visa overstays. Ali Winston will discuss how this technology is used in ICE's gang databases. And the Center's Harrison Rudolph, who has an article out this morning in Slate, will explain how the pervasive biometric tracking of immigrants is trickling down to all Americans. If we normalize scanning and tracking immigrants' bodies as if they threaten our society, it is only a matter of time before every body is scanned. How do we justify surveillance? One predicate is danger. Another is the idea that immigrants are different, that they are an other. Alex Naraste will explain how immigrants actually commit crimes at lower rates than the native-born. Shirali Munshi will explain how in the mid-20th century, courts actually adjudicated whiteness. Joan Donovan will discuss how white supremacists use genetic tests to defend their whiteness. And we'll hear from Tenmori Soundararajan about how structures of power undergird structures of surveillance. We'll hear from Professor Arjun Sethi about how a campaign to win hearts and minds became a campaign to track those hearts and watch those minds. And we'll hear from Professor Xiaoxing Shi, who was wrongly accused of effectively being a Chinese spy. This conference will not just be about being watched. It will also be about watching back and mobilization. I'm honored that our keynote speaker will be Vanita Gupta, the new president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. As our nation's chief law enforcement officer for civil rights, Vanita oversaw the civil rights investigation and consent decree in Baltimore, which aims to change policing practices like stop and frisk that are built on the assumption that poor people, that people of color, can be stopped, searched, and watched at any time. We'll hear from Carl Lipscomb on how black immigrants are mobilizing to reverse patterns of racial and ethnic discrimination in immigration enforcement. We'll hear from Christina Sinha on how local communities are organizing successfully to curb federal overreach. We'll hear from Ken Montenegro on how digital security, digital strength, turns on the community as well as the individual. We will hear from Malkia Cyril on how communities of color, immigrants and native-born alike, are organizing to reverse the color of surveillance. And finally, we will hear from the Guggenheim Award-winning artist Hassan Elahi, who was wrongly investigated as a terrorist and who took it upon himself to surveil himself and meticulously watch everything that he himself did and send all of that information to the FBI. Before I turn it over to Laura Moy for our first panel, let me close with two notes. The first is about the nature of this conference. This conference does not center on debate. This conference is much more about exposition, about lifting up a history and an impact of surveillance that too often is hidden, undiscussed, and overlooked. But we do believe in intellectual diversity. That's why last year our conference featured the General Counsel of the FBI and senior officials from the Department of Justice. This year, we invited not one, not two, but 5 senior DHS officials, and each of them declined our invitation. Finally, I want to let you know that the conference won't just be occurring up here on the stage. On Twitter, under the hashtag #ColorOfSurveillance, right there, you will see a range of information, links to scholarship, art, history that supplements the conference, and I hope you join the conversation there.